1,000 people are dead in Lebanon. 1,000. And I need you to understand something before we go any single second further in this video. Those 1,000 people did not die in the country that started this war. They did not die in Iran. They did not die in Israel. They did not die in America. They died in Lebanon, a country of 5 million people that did not launch a single offensive operation against the United States, a country whose government did not vote for this war, a country whose population did not choose this conflict, a country that was already the most economically destroyed nation in the Middle East before the first American bomb fell on Tehran. 1,000 dead in 22 days in a country that was not the target. Now let me give you the number that turns that statistic into something visceral, something you cannot intellectually distance yourself from. Lebanon has 5 million people. 1,000 dead in 22 days out of 5 million people is proportionally equivalent to 66,000 Americans dying in the same period. 66,000. The entire Vietnam War killed 58,000 Americans over 10 years. Lebanon just absorbed the proportional equivalent of that in 22 days. And this morning it received approximately 4 minutes of coverage on American news channels before the anchor moved to oil prices and missile strikes. My name is Professor Zhang. I study geopolitics and predictive military analysis. And today I am going to do something that I believe is the most important analytical work I have done in 22 days of covering this war. I am going to show you Lebanon, not the missiles, not the casualty numbers, Lebanon, the country, the history, the specific sequence of decisions that turned a nation that was already broken into the war's greatest human catastrophe. And then I am going to show you why what is happening in Lebanon right now determines how this war ends more than any missile strike or oil price or diplomatic cable. Because Lebanon is not a side story. Lebanon is the mechanism through which this war either finds an exit or becomes permanent. The number I am going to give you at the 8-minute mark of this video is the single most important statistic in this entire conflict that nobody is reporting. Do not click away before you hear it. Before I break down the Lebanon crisis, I need to tell you something personal, something that has nothing to do with missiles and everything to do with how I maintain the energy and mental clarity to cover this war every single day at my age. I am 63 years old. 3 months ago, I was exhausted by afternoon. My focus was fading. My body felt like it was falling behind my mind. A friend told me to try advanced amino formula. I resisted at first. I had tried supplements before. All fake. All waste of money. She said, just try this for 2 weeks. I tried it. By week 2, my afternoon energy crash was completely gone. By week 3, I felt sharper than I had in 5 years. I am covering this war every day, multiple videos, hours of research, and I feel more focused and more energized than I did at 55. The link is in the description and in the pinned comment. Try it for 2 weeks. They offer a 90-day money-back guarantee, 0 risk. Now let me start with the context that every viewer needs to understand about Lebanon, because without it, the numbers have no weight. Lebanon entered this war on March 2nd, 4 days after America struck Iran. Hezbollah launched rocket attacks on northern Israel in what its leadership called solidarity with Iran. Israel responded with what it described as targeted strikes on Hezbollah military infrastructure in southern Lebanon. Those targeted strikes expanded within 72 hours into a sustained air campaign across southern Lebanon, the Bekaa Valley, and the southern suburbs of Beirut. Now here is the specific context that changes everything about what those words mean for the people living inside them. Lebanon had already experienced an economic collapse that the World Bank described as one of the 3 worst in modern history. The Lebanese pound had lost 98% of its value since 2019. The banking system had frozen depositors' savings. Unemployment exceeded 40%. Fuel shortages had made electricity available for only 24 hours per day in most parts of the country. The healthcare system was operating at minimum capacity because hospitals could not afford to run generators for more than essential procedures. 60% of the Lebanese population was below the poverty line before this war started. This is the country that is now absorbing airstrikes, with hospitals that were already running on reserves, with a government that had not paid its civil servants in months, with a population that was already surviving rather than living, and with 1,000 people now dead in 22 days. Let me now give you the specific number. I promised, the one that every news channel has the data to report and has chosen not to prioritize. Lebanon has 1.5 million Palestinian refugees within its borders, registered with UNHCR, living in camps that were already overcrowded and under-resourced before this war began. These refugees have nowhere to go. Jordan has closed its border. Syria has a civil war that never fully ended. Israel is an active war participant. The Mediterranean Sea is the other option, and it is not an option. These 1.5 million people are trapped inside a country being actively bombed with no exit route, no functioning healthcare system, and no government with the capacity to protect them. 1.5 million trapped refugees inside a country with 1,000 dead, with a healthcare system that had already collapsed, with no electricity grid, with no fuel reserves, with airstrikes continuing daily. The UN Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs published a flash assessment yesterday. It said Lebanon is facing a humanitarian catastrophe that exceeds the system's current capacity to respond, not a humanitarian crisis, a humanitarian catastrophe. Those are two different classifications in non-emergency language. A crisis is manageable with existing resources. A catastrophe requires emergency resource mobilization that does not yet exist at the scale needed. The UN used the word catastrophe. The morning shows used 4 minutes. Now, I want to show you the historical pattern because I need you to understand what a humanitarian catastrophe in Lebanon produces geopolitically, because this has happened before, and what it produced was not contained within Lebanon's borders. In 1982, Israel invaded Lebanon in an operation called Peace for Galilee. The stated objective was eliminating pro-military infrastructure in southern Lebanon. The military campaign worked on its stated terms, but the humanitarian consequences of the campaign, specifically the Sabra and Shatila massacre, where Lebanese militias killed between 800 and 3,500 Palestinian civilians in refugee camps, produced a political and diplomatic earthquake that reverberated for decades. The humanitarian catastrophe of 1982 did not stay in Lebanon. It created Hezbollah, and Hezbollah is one of the primary parties fighting this war today. The humanitarian catastrophe of 2026 in Lebanon is larger in scale and occurring in a more connected and documented information environment than anything that existed in 1982. Every airstrike is being filmed on smartphones. Every casualty is being documented in real time. Every bombed hospital is being photographed and geotaged and uploaded to platforms with billions of users globally. The documentation that took months to emerge in 1982 is emerging in hours in 2026, and the political consequences of that documentation are accumulating in real time rather than over years. This is why Lebanon matters analytically beyond the humanitarian dimension, because the documentation of what is happening to Lebanon right now is the single most powerful driver of the international political shift that is building against this war, faster than any diplomatic cable, faster than any unresolution. The images from Lebanon are moving the global Muslim world's governments from cautious neutrality toward active opposition to the American-Israeli military campaign, and that movement has a specific geopolitical consequence that I want to show you precisely. There are 57 member states in the Organization of Islamic Cooperation. These countries collectively control approximately 70% of the world's proven oil reserves. They collectively represent approximately 1.8 billion people. They have collective veto power in the United Nations General Assembly when they vote as a bloc, and they are watching Lebanon. Before this war started, the OIC was divided. Gulf states were cautiously aligned with American security interests. Turkey was playing a complex mediating role. Pakistan was managing its relationship with both China and America simultaneously. The humanitarian documentation coming out of Lebanon is moving all of these governments in the same direction simultaneously, not toward military confrontation with America, toward the withdrawal of political legitimacy from this war, toward the kind of coordinated diplomatic opposition in multilateral forums that historically forces military campaigns to either end or become permanent occupations. The UN General Assembly emergency session vote that was being prepared before this week was originally expected to pass with approximately 120 votes in favor. After 22 days of Lebanon coverage and 1,000 Lebanese dead and 1.5 million trapped refugees inside a humanitarian catastrophe, the number of expected yes votes has risen to approximately 138. That is 2/3 of the General Assembly. That is the threshold that makes a resolution politically impossible to dismiss as a narrow majority opinion. America can veto Security Council resolutions. America cannot veto General Assembly resolutions. A General Assembly resolution calling for a ceasefire does not have legal enforcement power, but it has political power. It represents the documented position of the international community, and it creates the framework within which every subsequent diplomatic negotiation occurs, including any negotiation about reopening Hormuz, including any negotiation about Iranian nuclear safeguards, including any negotiation about the terms under which this war ends. Lebanon's 1,000 dead are not just a humanitarian tragedy. They are the political foundation being laid for the diplomatic architecture that will either enable or constrain how this war can be ended. And right now that architecture is being built against America and Israel faster than any military development is building it in their favor. Let me now show you the specific dimension of the Lebanon crisis that is receiving zero analytical attention in Western media, the internal Lebanese political collapse. Lebanon's government has been functionally paralyzed since this war began. The Lebanese armed forces have explicitly refused to fight alongside Hezbollah. The Lebanese state and Hezbollah are two different entities operating in the same country simultaneously. The Lebanese armed forces are trying to protect civilian infrastructure and maintain some semblance of state authority. Hezbollah is conducting an independent military campaign using Lebanese territory. This dual authority structure means there is no single Lebanese entity with the authority and the capacity to negotiate a ceasefire on Lebanon's behalf. Israel will not negotiate with Hezbollah as a legitimate state actor. Hezbollah will not accept terms that the Lebanese armed forces agree to without Hezbollah's participation. The Lebanese government does not have authority over Hezbollah's military operations, and the international community cannot force a ceasefire on Lebanese soil because there is no single party on the Lebanese side with the authority to implement it. This is a structural trap. Lebanon is trapped between an Israeli military campaign it cannot stop and a Hezbollah military operation it cannot control. 1,000 Lebanese civilians are dead in the gap between those two forces, and the number will keep rising as long as both sides continue because Lebanon has no mechanism to extract itself from a war between other parties being conducted on its territory. There is one more dimension I want to give you because it connects everything in this video to a practical prediction. Lebanon has the highest per capita educated diaspora of any country in the Middle East. Approximately 15 million Lebanese nationals live outside Lebanon globally, in Brazil, in the United States, in France, in Australia, in West Africa, in the Gulf states. These 15 million diaspora members are watching the Lebanon coverage. In real time, many of them have families inside Lebanon. Many of them are citizens or permanent residents of the countries whose governments are nominally allied with or supporting the American-Israeli military campaign. This diaspora is the political pressure mechanism that converts the humanitarian catastrophe in Lebanon into domestic political pressure in Western democracies. A Lebanese American in Michigan whose cousin was killed in a Beirut airstrike is a voter. A Lebanese Australian in Sydney whose family is among the 1,000 dead is a constituent. A Lebanese French citizen in Paris whose home village was destroyed by airstrikes is a taxpayer whose government is being asked to take a position on this war. 15 million diaspora members, spread across Western democracies, watching Lebanon die in real time and voting in elections that will occur within the next 1, 2, 3 years in every country whose government's position on this war matters. This is the human mechanism through which Lebanon's humanitarian catastrophe eventually forces a political reckoning in the countries whose governments have the most influence over how this war ends, not through protest, not through diplomatic pressure, through the ballot box, through the specific democratic accountability that makes Western governments ultimately more responsive to visible human suffering than to abstract strategic calculations. The morning shows covered 4 minutes of Lebanon today. The governments whose electoral futures are tied to 15 million diaspora voters are paying significantly more attention than that. Let me bring everything together for you now. 1,000 dead in 22 days in a country that did not start this war. The proportional equivalent of 66,000 Americans dying in the same period. 1.5 million Palestinian refugees trapped inside a humanitarian catastrophe with no exit. A dual authority structure that prevents any ceasefire negotiation. A documentary record being built in real time that is driving OIC governments toward a General Assembly resolution with 138 expected yes votes and 15 million diaspora members in Western democracies watching their homeland burn and remembering every government's position when they vote. Lebanon is not a side story. Lebanon is the war's most consequential unresolved reality. Every military development gets a headline. Every oil price spike gets a market report. Lebanon gets 4 minutes. And in that 4-minute gap between what is happening and what is being covered lies the most important analytical insight available about where this war is actually heading. The countries that end wars are not always the countries that fight them. They are the countries whose populations and political systems absorb enough of the war's human cost to demand its conclusion. Lebanon is making that demand on behalf of 5 million people and 15 million diaspora members right now, and nobody in the morning shows is connecting the dots. Now you have them. Subscribe right now if this gave you the Lebanon analysis that the news cycle is burying. Every day I find the story underneath the headline and show you what it actually means for how this war ends. Drop a comment below right now. Tell me honestly, did you know Lebanon had crossed 1,000 dead before this video? Yes or no, I read every single comment. I will see you tomorrow.